Hi guys, and welcome to our revision sessions. We are doing one of those sections which you seem to enjoy more than others. I watch my classes as they mature from the first term towards the second term, and they're just waiting for this one section which we call a reproduction. And when they're done, they realize there's just so much more theory in this whole story that they said, wow, we were waiting for all this, but it's all theory. Anyway, let's see what we need to know here. What do you need to know? First and foremost, you must be able to compare sexual and asexual. And you must know the advantages and disadvantages of each. You must then also look at the life cycles of plants and insects. Then you look at the reproductive strategies employed by some animals. Then you've got to look at reproduction in humans under these headings: structure and functions of male and female systems, gametogenesis, how are gametes formed, and then we look at ovulation and menstruation. In other words, we're looking at the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle. The uterine cycle is the one that takes place in the uterus, and the ovarian in the ovary. But these two cycles have to be synchronized so that all the hormones are secreted exactly at the right time, and everything must be in place as the cycle continues. We then move on to fertilization and implantation. Then that will lead us to pregnancy or gestation. Then we look at other issues around reproduction, and that is contraception and STIs. Contraception, how we want to prevent pregnancy, and STIs, sexually transmitted infections. The older books would talk about STDs, sexually transmitted diseases. So we have changed that disease now to the word infection. So that's what you need to know. Let's get right into the questions. Remember, when we're doing the questions, we cannot touch on all of those things. These other sections would have been covered in your normal lessons as we went through these sections, and also with other revision questions that will follow. So whatever is here is a sample of what you need to know. The first question, adapted from 2012, November, and February, March 2013. That means the supplementary paper this year. Paper 2, question 1.3. Now, question 1.3, 9 out of 10 would come with this set of instructions. Indicate whether each of the statements in column 1 applies to A only, B only, both A and B, or none of the items in column 2. So giving you two columns, that one and that one. They want to know this statement. Does A only apply to it, B only, A and B, or neither A nor B? So you need to read carefully. It's a method of reproduction in which the fetus is nourished through the umbilical cord. And this is talking to the section on strategies, reproduction strategies in different organisms. And the two words they give you is ovipary or vivipary. So where the fetus is nourished through an umbilical cord means that the fetus is inside the mother's body, and the mother is assisting with the nourishment of this fetus, and the fetus will be born alive. Not going to hatch, it's going to be born alive. And that one is only B, vivipary. Vivipary means that the young are born alive, and that the fetus grows inside the mother, and there's connection between the mother and the young. Ovipary is when an egg is laid, the fetus develops inside that egg, outside the body, and hatches from the egg. That would be ovipary. And ovo-vivipary, a combination, ovo-vivipary, would mean that there is an egg, but the egg remains inside the mother's body until just before hatching, when the mother releases it and it hatches immediately thereafter. But there's no connection between the mother and the egg in that time. In other words, the egg inside is self-sufficient. Whatever nourishment the fetus needs, the embryo needs, will be supplied by the egg yolk and the albumin that's found inside the egg. So those are the three terminology that is being tested there. You need to know those terms and you need to know examples. The sporophyte generation is the dominant generation. Sporophyte, which is the diploid, 2N, is the dominant. That means the plant that you are seeing is the sporophyte generation. And this is applicable to the angiosperm only. The moss, the gametophyte generation, is dominant. What is it being tested there? The life cycle of the moss and the life cycle of the angiosperm. So that's also something you need to look at. Hormone that remains at a high level during pregnancy. Progesterone or FSH? The answer is A only, progesterone. And by the way, when progesterone levels are high, FSH is suppressed. Characteristics of wind-pollinated flowers. Brightly colored petals or production of nectar. Nectar, sweet substance found inside, which attracts insects and birds sometimes. Brightly colored petals will attract birds. Would a wind-pollinated flower need these two things? Nay, not at all. Definitely not. So the answer it would be here, neither, none. Just none is good enough. The stigma of this flower is large and feathery and hangs outside the flower. Those are the clues. Would it be insect pollinated or wind pollinated? If the stigma was outside, the insect got no business there outside, so it's going to lose out if it does that. But if the stigma is outside and if pollen is being carried in the wind, then there's much more chance that the pollen will land on the stigma. So your answer here is B only. Question 2. Study a diagram of the male reproductive system below. So they're giving you a diagram of the male parts. And they have a whole lot of labels. They said, write down the letter A to G and the name of the following. So you've got to give the letter and the name. The part where meiosis takes place, and that would be F, the testes, or seminiferous tubules for that matter. The part that transports semen and urine to the outside of the body. And that would have to be C, and that is the urethra. Remember, in males, there's a common opening for urinating and deposition of sperm. In the female, they have a separate opening for urination, the urethra, and for receiving sperm, they have the vagina. Separate openings for separate functions. The part where immature sperm cells are stored, that would be the epididymis. Let's see where it is found, and that would be D. Epididymis. Let's see how correct we are. There we go. Straightforward question, giving you the diagram, asking you the functions in a different way, and you had to find the part instead of asking you for the functions. Name the male hormone that is responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics during puberty. Straightforward recall question. The answer is testosterone. Write down the letter A to G of the following. The part where the hormone mentioned in question 2.2 is produced, that would be the part F in this case here, and that will be in the testes, obviously. And here they only asked you for the letter. They did not ask you for the name. The part which is surgically cut during male sterilization. What does this mean? again, the question is, okay, the revision purpose is not only to give you answers, so you write furiously the answers to the questions, but in the exam they don't ask you this question, they ask you something similar. So the idea is to get the skill to answer this in other contexts. So while we're on the topic of surgical sterilization, what do we mean? Sterilization means that the male becomes sterile and not fertile. What does that mean? That means he would not be able to get a woman pregnant. How do we get that? We cut the sperm duct, and that in this diagram would be, there's the testis there, this is the sperm duct there we're talking about going down that way, and that is B. So we cut the vas deferens or the sperm duct. B. Question 3. Now we did the male, let's not be unfair to the females. The diagram below shows the structure of the female reproductive system. Nice neat diagram of the female there. Give the letter and name of, same type of questions, can you see? But now we're talking about the female. Letter and name of the part that breaks down when the levels of progesterone and estrogen drop. At the end of the cycle, when the levels of estrogen and progesterone drop, which part breaks up? And that would be C, the uterine lining or endometrium. The part that plays a role during copulation. Copulation is when the male inserts his penis into the female. And where does that happen? It happens at D, the vagina. The part where zygote will be formed, where the zygote will be formed, in other words, where the sperm and egg meet, that would be in this area here, the fallopian tube. So the answer would be A, the fallopian tube. The part where the Graafian follicles develop. Moving away from what we were talking all this time. The Graafian follicles are found in the ovary, and in this diagram, that would be B, the ovary there. And that would be our answer for that one. B, the ovary. And that takes us to question number 4. Good. You notice the female structure, when you look at it, it looks much more simple than the male structure. There's lots of different parts in the male structures that you have to label and give the functions of, whereas the female, fairly simple. But when you come to the actual cycles, the female cycle is the one that's more complicated. This one here, again, in the female body, the diagram below shows represents a developing fetus in a human body. They're giving you the labels V, W, X, Y, Z. Identify the label X, and we can do it on the diagram here, and hopefully I can get that right. X would be the umbilical cord. And the next question, Y would be the cervix. Sometimes, because of that label being confusing, the examiners may even give you a mark there for uterine wall, because it is continuous. But the most correct answer will be the cervix in that area. State one function of the fluid labeled Z. Here's the fetus, and around it is a membrane, this membrane here, and inside there's fluid here. They want to know what is the function of that. So before we talk about the function, we must explain what it is. That is the amniotic fluid, and there's plenty of functions, among which it provides the fluid medium for free movement of the fetus. It acts as a shock absorber. It protects the fetus against dehydration. It protects the fetus against temperature changes. You see, in this case, the examiners wanted, if you say protect, you must say protect against what, for what, etc. So if you do not say that, you would not get the mark. It promotes lung development. It helps the lungs to develop, and it holds waste as well in the embryo. Explain how the part labeled V is structurally suited to perform its function during the process of birth. V is the wall around here, this wall here. How is it suited? And the uterine walls, firstly, are made up of strong muscles. These muscles which contract and relax to push the fetus and the afterbirth forward. So in other words, the uterine wall is designed in such a way that it can help during labor when the female is pushing the baby out of her body. Also, the cervix has elastic muscles. Why? So it allows dilation of the cervix. By the way, the cervix dilates from 1 centimeter normally to about 10 centimeters, 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters during childbirth. When women take the epidural, that means the local anesthetic in the area, it helps for the dilation of the cervix to happen at a faster rate. Otherwise, it takes longer. And there are people that follow normal, strictly normal, they do not take the epidural, etc., and they manage fine. Name 2 systems in the body, the baby's body, that take over the functions of part W once the baby is born. Part W is the placenta in this case here, and you needed to know the functions of the placenta to answer this question. The placenta does many of these things, yeah. So one is it takes over the respiratory or the gaseous exchange system. While the fetus is inside the mother's body, the gases come to the placenta, and from there it diffuses to the baby, the necessary ones, and the waste gases come from the fetus, sorry, not the baby, the fetus, to the placenta, from the placenta to the mother and out. Digestive system, because the baby needs to eat now on its own or drink milk or whatever, and its digestive system must do the work. Whereas while it was inside the mother's body, it received only digested food via diffusion via the placenta. And the excretory system, because it needs to excrete metabolic waste now on its own, whereas in the fetus stage, it was just sending all its waste to the placenta, from the placenta to the mother, from the mother's blood, it's going to be expelled out of her body. So she was doing all the work. Explain what prevents another ovum from being produced while the fetus is developing in the body. What prevents another ovum from being produced while the fetus is developing in the human body? So while there is a fetus there, what stops another fetus coming, or another ovum from being produced? And that is the high levels of progesterone. You can't talk about progesterone on its own. You must talk about high levels of progesterone. Progesterone is there all the time. It's either higher or lower. When it's higher, it suppresses FSH. It inhibits the secretion of FSH. So what is FSH? Follicle stimulating hormone. It will stimulate the follicles. So if there's if there's a suppression of the FSH, then the follicles will not be developed. Question 5, also from 2013. The graph below shows the levels of the hormones estrogen and progesterone in a pregnant woman's blood. Pregnant woman's blood. Let's look at the graph. Nice time to study a little bit of graph. Heading, both variables, levels of estrogen and progesterone, one variable, over a period of time. That's the other variable. So time is the independent variable, and the dependent variable is the levels of these two things. Therefore, time comes on the x-axis, heading time in days, and the levels of hormones in the blood in arbitrary units is given on the y-axis. Notice the equidistant there. You do not have to rule lines across there, and it's not always done for you in the exams. You need to be careful when you're doing that. Let's look at these two things. And notice in your books, when you're drawing 2-line graphs or 3-line graphs or 3-bar graphs, you've got to show the difference between the one from the other. You either label it, or you use different colors and you indicate it as a key. Here they have labeled it. This one is progesterone, this one is estrogen. Right? So you looked at that, you looked at the graph, and now you need to answer the questions. When are the levels of estrogen and progesterone the same? Did you need to study about this? Did you need to study an encyclopedia of reproduction to answer this? Not at all. You had to look at the graph and look at the time when the levels of estrogen and progesterone are the same. All you need to do is look at the graph, and where do these two lines touch? There and there. At that point, or those points, they are the same. So day 6, there you have it. Day 6, that one, around day 6. And day 16, I think, yeah, day 17, sorry, day 17, that's this one coming down there, in between 16 and 17. Good, 18, sorry. How much estrogen is in the blood on the day 14? Again, did you have to study this? Nobody asked you to remember exactly how much estrogen there must be in a woman. For a start, there's no such a volume, there's no such a level that we can talk about for all women. They all have different. So we have to go to this graph, we have to go to day 14. Estrogen is the yellow line. We take our ruler and we go up there. You know, my lines are going crooked, but that's the story. You take your ruler and you go across that way, and that's where you're having your answer there, which will be just over 30. 32 arbitrary units. Notice you're giving the unit as well. This unit is arbitrary units. If it was percentage, you would say percentage and so on, because there is 2 marks there. They will give you 1 for that and 1 for the unit. So in a case like that, even if your answer was wrong and you used the right unit, you would have got 1 mark at least. 1 out of 2 is 50%. What evidence on the graph shows that an ovum was fertilized? If I was a wise ass, then I would have said, you told us in the instruction that the woman is pregnant. But they ask now for evidence in the graph that shows that the woman is pregnant or that the ovum was fertilized. And what do you look at? You look at the level of estrogen and progesterone, especially progesterone. Notice that the progesterone level is staying the same at this high. It's not tapering down. So the progesterone level being high is an indicator that a woman may be pregnant. Why is this so? What are the functions of progesterone? One is it maintains pregnancy. So if the progesterone level remains high, then obviously there's a chance that the woman is pregnant. At the same time, progesterone also suppresses FSH. Now, if the woman was coming to the end of the cycle and there was no pregnancy, then we need to let that FSH start stimulating the follicles further. So what does progesterone do? It drops. And when progesterone drops, FSH is no more inhibited, so it rises. And when it rises, it stimulates further follicle development. So therefore, a good indicator that a woman is pregnant in a graph question would be that the progesterone level remains high. That's a whole lot of reproduction in a very short time, guys. I think you've earned yourself a small break. Take time off, stretch, have some water, and come back and let's nail this reproduction. Hi guys, and welcome back. I'm hoping you had a good stretch and a nice cold glass of water to keep you nice and nourished for the rest of the session we are about to carry on with. We move on to question 6, also from March 2013, paper 2, question 2.1. Study the information in the table below showing the growth of a fetus in the uterus of a woman. So in the left column, they're telling you the age of the fetus in months, proceeding from 1 to 9. And on the right-hand side, the length of the fetus in millimeters, showing growth. Straightforward table, easy to read. Between which 2 months did the fetus grow the most? You didn't have to be a scientist or a rocket scientist at all to figure that out. You've got to look at the table from there to there, from there to there, from there to there, and there to there, and so on, and see where it was the most. And the answer would have been 4 and 5. If you look, and how do we know that? We take the difference between the 5th month and the 4th month, and we take that difference is greater than the difference in any other 2 consecutive months. Draw a line graph to represent the data from the table above. So in other words, they've given you this data. They want you now to take this and plot it on a line graph. And look at this here. Just watch it. The growth of a fetus in the uterus of a woman over time. Wasn't given there, but why? Just watch why I put that there. You see? That becomes your heading. In the stem of the question, in the stem of the table, wherever you're going to find it, the heading comes from there. Most important is to include the two variables. In this case, one was growth of the fetus, and the other is over time, in this case over 9 months. Be more specific because they told you in 9 months there. So you do that. You're going to get 1 mark for that heading if it has both these variables. If any one thing is missing there, you won't get a mark. You do not have to put units in the table, in the heading. The units go with the axis headings. That means the x-axis, age of fetus in months, that's the units, and length of fetus in millimeters, that's where it goes. Now, notice that over the last year or so, the number of marks allocated to a graph has decreased from around 13, went to 9, and now it's staying around 7 or 8 marks only. So there's lots of the criteria that have been combined. For example, the heading of the y-axis and the units and the scale goes as 1. So if anything is wrong here, either the heading or the scale or the intervals is not correct, you'll lose the 1 mark there. If you got all that right, you're going to get the 1 mark there. Same goes for the x-axis. 1, 2, 3, all that goes as 1 mark. Thereafter, they can look at the plotting as a type of graph. They're going to give you 1 mark for that. And now the trend is, if they told you to plot a line, 2-line graphs on the same axis, and if you plot only one, you will lose the mark for type of graph, because the type had to be 2-line graphs, not 1-line graph, but 2-line graphs in that graph there. And thereafter, you simply plot your points, make sure your points are clearly visible, you join the dots, and there you have your graph there made up for you. And then you're going to get, for joining the graph, sometimes they give you a mark, and then for plotting, depending on the examiners, they can vary from, if you got 2 points, you got 3 points or whatever, they give you marks for that, and in that way you get your 7 marks for the graph. State one general conclusion that can be drawn from the data about the growth of the fetus in the uterus. And the graph, the line is telling you the story. The line is giving you a story there. Watch what's happening over time. That's what's happening there. And therefore, your answer would be the length of the fetus increases with time. 6.4, state 2 functions of the amniotic fluid that surrounds the fetus during its development. We've dealt with a question similar to that, so let's just go straight to it. And the answer is controls the temperature, changes, prevents drying out or dehydration, allows free movement, acts as a shock absorber. Also, sometimes they talk about it holds some of the excretory substance, etc. Helps in lung development. 6.5, name and describe. Name and describe the stage that signals the start of natural birth process once the fetus is fully developed. So now you needed to think about this. This is now after ovum formation, after fertilization, after implantation, just before the process starts. What is this phase called? And at the same time, describe it. And you should know by now that this is called labor. And what happens during labor? The uterine muscles will contract and relax. And this pushes the baby forward. Also, the cervix dilates during this time. Some people will talk about also that the amnion breaks, and we talk of the breaking of the waters. This is the first signal that you're close to labor. But here they were talking about the start of the natural birth process, start. So this, some books will keep that as part of it, and we're talking more about the labor. So keep that in mind. Now we come to this type of questions that deal with the female cycle. And these questions are asked in different ways. And if you look at the ways that we've put together here, these are some of the ways in which they ask these questions. So concentrate keep your pens in hand and follow what we're saying and try these questions on your own as well. Study the diagram below showing the sequence of events of development of an ovum in a 28-day cycle. So in other words, this would be an ovary. You should understand that now. That would be an ovary. And they're showing you the follicle development as time is going by there. They've labeled a few things there in that area and that area there. The first question, 7.1, says, identify the following. What do they ask first? Follicle A. Follicle A, this one here, is the Graafian follicle. Why do we say it's the Graafian follicle? Because in this follicle, this is the largest follicle that's here. That's number one. Number two, you can see clearly the mature ovum inside there. The next question says structure labeled C. Let's go there. Structure labeled C, this guy here. And that would be the corpus luteum. That's it. You got it right. Process shown at B. Now watch the question how it changes. Started by saying follicle labeled A, then it went to structure labeled C. Now it's telling you process shown at B. So it's telling you that it's not the structure that they're pointing at. They're asking you for the process that's happening in this area here at B. And that is, you can see the egg is being released from the Graafian follicle, and this is known as ovulation. Hormone responsible for the formation of part A. What is part A? Part A is the Graafian follicle. We labeled that just now. What hormone is responsible for its formation? And that would be FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. It stimulates the primary follicle to become secondary, to become tertiary, to become Graafian follicle eventually. Hormone responsible for the formation of part C. Part C we labeled as the corpus luteum. How does the corpus luteum form? Corpus luteum forms when ovulation takes place. In other words, after the Graafian follicle releases the egg, the remainder of the follicle is called corpus luteum. Now what hormone caused that? Will be the hormone that caused ovulation. And that hormone, the name is LH, luteinizing hormone. What type of cell division resulted in the formation of part D? Part D, I told you earlier, is the ovum. And guys, you should know that for an ovum to form, one would need to undergo meiosis. Meiosis leads to the formation of gametes. An ovum is a female gamete, so therefore it would be meiosis. If the event shown above took place in a 28-day cycle, state whether fertilization took place during this period. Now, it's a tight one. You can't see much here except for the follicles. And from the follicle to corpus luteum, corpus luteum, corpus luteum. The trick in this one here, you've got to look at corpus luteum and the speed at which it degenerates to that part. The quicker it degenerates, that means pregnancy did not take place. If it stays bigger for a longer period of time, it would indicate that pregnancy took, pregnancy, the woman is pregnant. Pregnancy can't take place. Fertilization takes place to lead to pregnancy. Good. And obviously, in this case, our answer would be no. Explain your answer. The corpus luteum would have stayed intact and not be destroyed in that time. Explain how and why. Now listen to this question very carefully. To explain how and why. There's two parts of it, the how and the why. The production of FSH is inhibited when fertilization takes place. We spoke about this earlier in an earlier question. And the answer is obvious. If fertilization occurs, high levels of progesterone enters the blood. The high levels of progesterone inhibits FSH. So your answer actually starts there. High levels of progesterone inhibits the production of FSH. And now the why. Why is it happening? Because low levels of FSH stops development of an ovum inside a Graafian follicle. Why is this? We already got an egg and the woman is pregnant. Why must we get another egg already? So, because this would be wasteful. So that's why no ovulation occurs when the individual is pregnant. Why? Because she's not going to waste eggs, and it's going to cause complications. Where is this other, if that other egg gets fertilized, where is it going to be implanted? Because there's already one implanted in the body of the female. Question 8, still on graphs. Study the graph below which shows the menstrual cycle and the influence of different hormones on it. Now watch this graph carefully. This area here talking about the hormones of the pituitary gland. This part of the graph talks about the growth of the follicle. This one here talks of the ovarian hormonal levels. In other words, the hormones inside the ovary. And lastly, the thickness of the uterine lining. And this graph puts together this whole section nice and neatly to show you how important it is that these two cycles, the uterine cycle and the menstrual or the ovarian cycle, how these things must work together. Let's look at it. On which day does ovulation take place? Now, you got to look at the pictures. Look at this, follow this diagram. There, no ovulation. Aha, ovulation is there. Can you see the ovum being released there? At the same time, your other clue is the level of LH. Look at the LH peaks. It's in this area here. So if you follow that, that's when ovulation took place. That's around 14th or 15th day, depending how you look at the graph. Day 14 or 15, all right? Between which days does menstruation take place? What is menstruation? Menstruation is when the lining of the endometrium breaks away from the wall and is released from the vagina with bleeding. And how will it be indicated in a graph? It will be indicated in a graph when the lining of the endometrium is becoming thinner. And in this graph, the only part where it's happening is from there to there. So in other words, from 0 to about 7 days. Day 0 to day 7. 8.3, state one function of the luteinizing hormone. We've spoken about the luteinizing hormone a few times today. And the function of the luteinizing hormone, it causes the follicle to burst open or stimulates ovulation. And in so doing, it leads to, I would say, leads to the formation of corpus luteum. So it stimulates ovulation, it triggers ovulation. When LH levels are high, the ovum is released from the ovary. And when the ovum is released, the Graafian follicle then becomes corpus luteum. So these two things happen because of the spike in LH. Describe the changes in the level of LH shown in the graph. Now look here carefully. How many marks? 3 marks are given to describe the changes in the level of LH. Now if you want to say just look at it this way and say it increases, how many marks are you going to get? You get 1 mark. It's not enough. They're asking for 3 marks. You've got to talk about 3 different areas. So you talk of the days. From 0 to about 10, 11 days, the level of LH stays more or less the same, as you can see there. From day 11, so your first mark. Second mark would be from about day 11, there's a steep increase, reaching its peak on day 14. Second mark. Thereafter, it decreases and remains more or less constant to the rest of the cycle. There you go. LH remains low up to day 12, 13. You can read it from there. Then it increases sharply up to 14, after which it decreases. So can you see your marks here? You needed to give it there. And this is the other thing with graph questions. You must refer to the data in the graph regularly. Describe the relationship between the level of estrogen and endometrium from day 7 to day 14. Day 7 to day 14. So there's your day 7 here. There's estrogen levels there, and there's your endometrium levels in the same time. Actually, we should go there, not there. Okay, let's be more accurate. going there. So what's happening? Immediately there you can see there is an increase going up that way. And what's happening here? Also increasing. Why? Because the function of estrogen is to cause the endometrium lining to thicken. That's the function. So obviously that relationship has to exist. As the estrogen level increases, the the endometrium wall also increases. Simple as that. 8.6. Explain why it is necessary for the level of progesterone in the blood to increase after ovulation. Can you see now? We're asking the same thing in a different way. But what's the answer? This helps to maintain the thickness of the endometrium for greater chance of implantation, and it also prevents further follicle development. There are two reasons there. Did fertilization take place in the 28-day cycle? They ask this question quite often. In this graph, go back up. Look at progesterone. Remember I said you look at progesterone, you look at corpus luteum. It's becoming small quickly, and what's happening to progesterone? It's going down. If progesterone is going down, nothing has happened here. Sorry, try again next month. The answer is no. Explain your answer. I've given you the answer already. The progesterone level has dropped or not maintained, and or corpus luteum has started to degenerate very quickly. So these two things are indicators that the woman is not pregnant, because the minute progesterone levels decrease, then the endometrium lining will start tearing away from the wall, and this signals the beginning of the next menstruation. Don't confuse the menstrual cycle with menstruation. Menstruation is the actual time when this endometrium wall plus the unfertilized egg is being released from the female's body, accompanied with blood. That takes us to question 9. Again, a graph question. This question, very favorite part of the examiners. They like to ask questions on reproduction with graphs. Two graphs below show the changes in the temperature in the woman's body, moving away from the hormones now to temperature, and the levels of the hormones, estrogen and progesterone, during the menstrual cycle. So now they're showing you a link between temperature and the hormones as well. The release of the ovum takes place when there is a rise in the body temperature, slight rise in the body temperature. Look at this graph, and I want you to look at it very carefully. Look at the levels here. This is where our body temperature is, just above 36.5, there, around there, and the temperature has dropped a bit, going down there, and then it goes up there. Can you see that? Look at the spike that we are talking about. From 36.5 to about 37 degrees. It's only 0.5 degrees higher. It's a very slight temperature that we are talking about. But that's the story there. Okay? Changes in estrogen and progesterone level. Can you see what's happening? Estrogen levels are going up, then they're coming down, and then the progesterone level goes up, and it too comes down. What was the temperature of the woman on day 15? Straightforward question, you need to read. 37.1 would be your answer. Anything between 36.9 to 30. Remember, when you're looking at your paper, the way it was rolled off, there may be slight deviations there. By how many degrees Celsius did the temperature vary between the days 13 and 15? Show all working. We've done that already. Any answer between 36.9 to 37.1 minus 36.2. That figure doesn't change. That one there could be vary. So the answer would be anything between 0.7 to 0.9 degrees Celsius. From the graph, state two factors that indicate that ovulation had occurred. Simple, and we've discussed this already. The temperature rose, the estrogen level decreased, and the progesterone level started to increase. Progesterone level will only increase only after ovulation, and in that way the estrogen levels will decrease. Explain the importance of the higher level of progesterone from day 15 to day 20. Again, coming back to progesterone, we've asked this a million times already. Why? the answer is still the same. Can you see the context of the question is different, but the answer is still the same. Maintain the thickness of the endometrium to prepare the uterus lining for the embryo, and also to suppress FSH so that no more follicles must be developed. Now we move on to question 2. A young couple who already have 3 children are planning to use contraceptives. They do not know which options for contraception are available. Give one reason why this couple may not want to have more children. There are a million reasons. Some we can't even put on a question paper. People may shoot us. All right? To give their children a good quality of life. Some people think, you know what, we got 3 children. We want to give them a better quality of life. We have more children. Now where are we going to put the children? They'll be cramped and so on and so on. Or affordability. They can't afford more children. They don't have money. Or economic, same thing, will be tied up that way there. You can look at all those reasoning there. By the way, this was from last year's paper, and some of the answers that we got, I don't want to say it on TV. Name any two barrier methods they can use for contraception. Barrier methods. You must be careful here because they mentioned barrier. So one would be condom, femidom, IUD, diaphragm, cervical cap. The pill or injection are not barrier. They are controlling the woman's cycle. There's no barrier. They're not preventing contact between the sperm and the egg. A barrier is a method that will prevent the sperm from reaching the egg. So that's why these are the only acceptable answers there. Question 11, still on contraceptions. This one is why we put this here? Because it deals with investigative skills. So you're adding another dimension of skills. Read the questions below, read the paragraph and answer the question. They give you a whole story of male contraceptive chemical. There's the story there. They want to know from there, state a hypothesis for this investigation. Important is not the answer, but the fact that the hypothesis, look at a varied answer that you could have given here. One is gossypol acts as a contraceptive in males. Or gossypol does not act as a contraceptive in males. Remember, it's a hypothesis. It could be either way. Or gossypol has no effect on male fertility. Or gossypol has an effect on male fertility. Or gossypol increases male fertility. Or gossypol decreases male fertility. Lots of answers. But what is the common denominator? There are 3 ingredients here. 1, independent variable. 2, dependent variable. And 3, a relationship. Look at the relationship. Decrease, it's a relationship. Increase, it's a relationship. Has an effect. Has no effect. Does not act. Acts as a contraceptive. And so on and so on. So these 3 things must be there. It must be stated as a statement, not in a past tense, because you can't make a hypothesis after the event. You make a hypothesis going forward, before you do the investigation. State 4 planning steps that must be done by researchers before the above investigation is taken place on human. 1, you have to determine the sample size. They must find volunteers. They'll have to advertise and get volunteers. They may even have to pay them. And a comparable group as a control. So volunteers to take the gossypol or use the gossypol. At the same time, they must get another group that's not going to use the gossypol. So you got a control group and you got the experimental group. And they must design a way of recording the data. They can also design a way of presenting this data to the public. In the investigation above, state the support research on male contraception. Number of sperm. Object to research on male contraception, gossypol. Explain one reason why some people might support research on male contraception. There, what's good about it is that male can take responsibility for contraception. Men then don't have to use a condom during intercourse. which they may not like. And more importantly, in most circles, they would say, is to control the lower population growth. And B, object to the research. Why would you object to this? One is, we don't know whether this thing has side effects, or the effects are not yet known, or against, it may be against people's religion for contraception. Some men don't want to take the responsibility for contraception. And, or you could say women are responsible for contraception. Those are all acceptable answers. That brings us to question 12. Question 12 says, describe the series of changes that a female experiences through her 28-day cycle if fertilization does not occur. Remember, this is usually 20 marks. In terms of the essay, remember in life science, you are not required to write long stories. The best thing in an essay is to restrict your essay to at least to about maximum 1.5 pages. If you're writing more than 1.5 pages, then you are including a lot of irrelevant facts. You do not have, because you're only getting 17 marks for content. And that means 17 marks is 1 mark for 1 fact. 1 fact is on 1 line. So in other words, 17 lines is enough. I'm being generous to say 1.5 pages. But you must have a logical sequence. You must talk the thing through. The most important thing is to have a nice flow in your answer as well. You must be telling a story. Here they're saying what changes take place in a female's body during the 28-day cycle if fertilization does not take place. If you know only the hormones, what are they? F for FSH, O for estrogen, L for LH, and P for progesterone. If you know these in this order that I've given to you, FOLP, F-O-L-P, FOLP, and if you describe these hormones, in other words, where they secreted and what they do. Where you secreted, what do you do? Where you secreted, what do you do? Where you secreted, what do you do? Just with these 1, 2, 3, 4 hormones, where they come from and their functions, actually tells you the whole story in the females. But that is how easy it is. So even if you don't know the finer details, if you can simply use this part, FSH is secreted by the pituitary gland and it causes the follicle to develop. From there, the follicle develops into Graafian follicle and it secretes estrogen. What does estrogen do? It causes a thickening of the endometrial lining. In the meanwhile, LH is then secreted, which stimulates ovulation, causes the egg to be released. When the egg is released, the Graafian follicle, the empty follicle, becomes corpus luteum. Corpus luteum then secretes progesterone. What does progesterone do? It increases the blood supply. It increases the thickness of the endometrium. At the same time, it also suppresses FSH, so no more follicles will develop. And if the woman falls pregnant, progesterone also maintains pregnancy. In other words, it keeps that area where the implantation has taken place in a good condition. First part. You can then just add, if fertilization does not take place, what happens? We have discussed all of that earlier. So can you see the female cycle, although it seems complicated, is not, if you follow what I've just given you now, the recipe to understand it in a better way. At the same time, you must be able to take this knowledge that we have done, the theoretical content knowledge, and put it into a graph question. Because what is a graph question testing you? It's testing you on these very things here that we have mentioned here. The graph question is checking whether you know when progesterone goes up, what happens? When does ovulation take place? What hormone causes ovulation? What is the relationship between this hormone and that hormone? And by the way, when you look at it, there's a negative feedback mechanism playing right here. In your endocrine system, you can look at what we're talking about, negative feedback mechanism, and how that system develops in this particular case in female cycle in her body. Guys, that is the essay, and I think the essay ties up the whole female part of reproduction for us. Remember, you need to also look at reproductive strategies. You look at plant life cycles, that means the life cycle of the moth, the life cycle of the angiosperm. You've got to look at the significance of seed as well in your studies. And with that, I'm hoping that what we did here will help you to master some of the content that usually poses problems to learners. Thank you very much.